Every week, there is a new UAP leak, a new whistleblower, a new document that comes out. But what if I was to tell you that the disclosure that everyone is actually waiting for isn't about aliens arriving, it's about us waking up? The more I've studied this, the more I don't think that they're just visiting Earth at all. I think that they're actually activating something that's already inside of us. And once you understand what that is, you'll never look at alien contact in the same way again. When I first started diving into the UAP disclosure, I wasn't just looking for spaceships, I was looking for patterns. And across decades of contact reports, from famous cases to hundreds of lesser known ones, I found something that researchers keep circling back to but rarely say out loud, that almost none of these experiences happen through a telescope. They don't happen because someone was looking up at the right moment, they happened through some kind of altered state of consciousness, some kind of shift, a frequency that changed the body right before contact. So let's actually look at what some of these patterns are, case by case. Okay, so we're going to start with one of the most famous cases. So this is a case about Travis. This is one of the most famous cases in contact history. And in November of 1975, he was a logger. Travis was working with a crew in a forest that I can't say the name of in Arizona, when the crew basically saw this glowing disc that was hovering near the road. So Walton got out of the truck and he basically approached it, but he was struck by this beam of light. His crew were terrified, obviously, and they drove off, and they basically thought that he was dead. So Walton disappeared for 5 days in total, and when he reappeared, he was disoriented and obviously dehydrated, and described being taken aboard a craft and encountering these small little beings with really large heads and eyes. And all crew members all passed a polygraph test, which confirmed that they believed what they witnessed was real. And the case became so well documented, it was turned into a 1993 film, Fire in the Sky. Here's what's really interesting about this case. Travis didn't say that the beam just knocked him back. He basically said that it knocked him unconscious instantly, and he then ended up blacking out. And when he came to, he described waking up not in the forest, but in some kind of hospital-like room which was on the craft. He said that the mental state that he was in was something that he's really struggled to articulate even further down the line. It wasn't linear, it wasn't completely clear, it felt like an altered state of consciousness. And I do wonder whether there's an aspect of this where I question whether they either take the physical body and then they work with our second body, which is the body that you go into when you're doing an out-of-body experience. Could it be that when a lot of these people are in and out of consciousness, it's actually their second body experiencing an out-of-body experience? And then could that out-of-body experience actually affect our physical body? In fact, it's bringing up a memory of reading Robert Monroe's book, Journeys Out of the Body, and he speaks about going out of the body and then pinching someone in his second body, and that pinch actually resulted in a bruise in the physical reality in real life. So I guess what someone does potentially to a physical body or in their physical body could actually have a real effect on our physical bodies here in our 3D reality. And this is the thing that you see in a lot of UAP or abduction cases, is people describe being in this altered state of consciousness, and then they're often put onto some kind of gurney, and whether that's experimented with, I believe that they're actually being given enhancements. And a lot of people end up leaving these experiments and they say that they either have implants, but when they're asked whether they want to remove the implants, they don't want to, because they say that it's actually unlocking a part of their consciousness or enhancing them in some way that they didn't have access to previously. So a lot of them don't actually want to get rid of it because they feel like they may end up losing something, which just goes to show that if the ET beings or these abduction cases weren't actually here to enhance us or to activate us in some way, they wouldn't be operating on us. And of course, they could be experimenting, but it does seem that a lot of these people end up leaving with some kind of extraordinary ability or psi ability that becomes activated because of this experience. After this event, Travis is known to have eventually changed his interpretation of the events, where he believes that these beings were actually healing him. And when asked whether he felt more spiritually connected, he ended up saying profoundly so. Now, he did go on to experience a load of trauma after this experience, so I'm not saying that he came away from this experience completely unscathed, but I do find it interesting that he even came to this conclusion eventually that these beings weren't actually trying to hurt him, they were trying to help or heal him in some way. And that this experience ended up actually opening up his spiritual perception and his connection to the ethereal world, which I find really interesting because a lot of that is like tied to like the meaning of life and our level of fulfillment that we experience on this world. So that is one case that's very interesting. But for some contactees, the experiences and the shifts that they have because of these experiences is something that is permanent afterwards. Take Whitley Strieber, for example, who is the author of the best-selling book Communion. And Strieber basically describes his contact with these beings he simply calls the visitors. And what's really interesting about these is they say that the primary mode of communication wasn't verbal, it was telepathic. And they were using symbolic imagery and a direct download of information and images into his awareness. Like, this is literally upgrading him, giving him information, giving him downloads of information. And we see this a lot with channels that are downloading information from someone else. Bashar, who is a channeled being that has really made a come up over the last few decades, is someone that consistently says that he is downloading information from these ET beings to be able to uplift and expand the human consciousness and the human collective. And in the years since, Strieber has spoken openly about how this experience opened something up in him, whether it was psychic abilities or meditative abilities. He believes that these things may be dormant in all of us and not something that he was uniquely gifted. And he describes specific practices that he uses to now strengthen this connection over time. And it's almost like a muscle that you can train. They didn't just abduct him for no reason. They abducted him to impart information on him, because I believe that these beings have an awareness that the impact on one person, the ripple effect of that can be absolutely huge. So they choose, maybe it's a soul contract that people end up having before they're here. They decide to have these experiences with people, and these ET beings are tuning us up to bring online these, I think, dormant DNA. And we have a lot of junk DNA just in our body randomly. It's not there randomly. There is a reason for that. And I do believe, just like, a cancer is a gene that can turn on and off, I believe that we have the same thing for the psi abilities, whether that is telepathy, expanded intuition, telekinesis, or even just a felt sense or connection of something larger. And this is actually a pattern that shows up repeatedly amongst contactees. These things aren't separate from the contact experience. They seem to emerge like directly out of it. Contact itself is the activation switch for a capacity and a skill that was already there, just dormant, resting inside of us. And I do wonder whether this is an entire lost civilization, an entire lost technology, not in like mechanics or anything, but in technology of the body. And there are companies that have spent like their entire lives proving this. Robert Monroe, who I spoke about earlier, his whole theory and his processes have been well documented, have been studied by the CIA. Monroe founded what's now called the Monroe Institute in the 1970s after spontaneously having these out-of-body experiences that he couldn't explain. And in his first book that I spoke about earlier, Journeys Out of the Body, he documents entering what he calls Locale 2. So the 3 locales, and Locale 2 is one of them, which is a non-physical realm that was inhabited by other intelligences. But it's in his second book, Far Journeys, where things get really interesting. And Monroe actually describes direct encounters with what he names INSPECs, which is short for Intelligent Species Non-Physical Non-Human Intelligences. Bit of a mouthful there. But he's communicated with these beings directly in these out-of-body experiences, the same out-of-body experiences that have been proven by the CIA to be legitimate. The CIA went there to debunk all of this, and they came out with a whole document which is available on the CIA's website, which basically validated that all of this was real and true. At one stage, they actually classified this whole document, meaning that someone in the government looked for this technology for altering consciousness and decided it was significant enough to actually keep secret. I do wonder whether it's because they don't want us to realize how powerful we actually are, because we could use this stuff to basically manifest, to shift realities, to see government secrets. The possibilities are absolutely huge. And decades later, this was then declassified. And as I said, it's now a public record that you can see yourself. But the really interesting and crazy part about this is that not just that the report exists, but the actual program, the gateway experience, is now actually open to the public. And there's no security clearance that's needed for this. There's no 3-letter agency. This is literally the closest thing that we have to Hogwarts for an everyday human. And I'm actually going to be going to the Monroe Institute to do the gateway process in literally 3 days. I leave now. And I'm so excited because I'm literally going to put all of this stuff to the test. But what's really cool is like there's an entire community of people online who have actually gone through this program, the gateway process, and they are reporting exactly what you'd expect if this technology was actually real and working. People documenting gateway sessions where they encounter this non-human intelligence for often sometimes the first time on day one of doing this process. Other people describe ongoing contact with these beings that continued well after the program actually ended.
Okay, I wanted to interrupt this for a moment because I'm now back from the gateway process, and I actually had my own ET experiences within this, and they were in my second body. There was one where I was in my check unit, which is where you are doing all of your meditations. You have your headphones on. You can either be in complete darkness or you can, have the light on if you want to. And I was actually trying to go to sleep. So I'd been awake for maybe 2 or 3 hours. And just before I went to bed, I saw this video that was saying, if an ET is nearby, sometimes they can make your ear ring really loudly to get your attention. And that can be a sign that there is an ET or a UAP nearby. And so 2 hours into me trying to get to sleep, I hear this really high-pitched ringing in my ears, so much so that it startled me to open up my eyes. And in front of me, right there, were these huge ET heads that were just kind of floating there. Now, these very much weren't in the physical reality. They were definitely somewhere else. And I tried to telepathically speak to them, but they said absolutely nothing to me. But they were there, and the buzzing in my ear was really loud. And there often aren't synchronicities around this kind of stuff. There is no mistake that I saw that video just before I went to bed, and then I had this experience. And I spoke to the Monroe Institute facilitators the very next day, and they were like, this is very common for them to kind of make contact with you in this way just to show that they can. Now, I will also say that my particular group of people that were doing this experience, we all had quite a lot of ET interference and experiences. We were near the 8-8 portal as we were doing this, and there was a lot of Syrian activity, a lot of people having their second body operated on. I was one of them because I have endometriosis, and one of my roommates actually ended up finding herself in a situation where she was asking these ET beings to help ease my pain as I was in a little bit of pain whilst I was doing one of the meditations, which I actually felt a stabbing pain whilst that was happening, even though we weren't in the same meditation, and then the pain completely went. And so it is very interesting that all of these synchronicities do seem to align. Now, I will be very clear that these were not in the physical reality, they were in the second body. I personally feel like I've been healed on so many levels from that experience. Anyway, I'm going to do a whole other video, probably multiple, on that experience. So I'm going to leave that there, but just wanted to add that in because, I had this exact experience.
This sounds like ET beings trying to get in contact with us, trying to download information, trying to direct us maybe whether it's onto a different timeline or to activate something that has been dormant within us. And maybe the most interesting pattern of all of them is people reporting that going through the gateway itself seemed to switch on something inside of them. Increased intuition, telepathic experiences, psychic perception that they didn't have before. Even as I'm preparing to go, Yale University is currently doing some kind of study with the Monroe Institute to see, which I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be going through it, to basically look at your intelligence. I haven't gone through the questions, so I'm not entirely sure yet, but I assume it's something around intelligence, perception and stuff. And then you do it before you go, and then you do it afterwards as well, because they want to track the differences and the upgrades that's actually happening. These beings, or this UAP disclosure movement, isn't meant to just be about us meeting a physical being. It is about us activating something that is dormant within us. Now, obviously, a lot of those ones that I just spoke about are like personal testimonials, not necessarily peer-reviewed data, but the Institute itself keeps official language pretty conservative, intuition, creativity, spiritual connection, but the community actually doing the work, they are describing the exact same patterns that we just saw with Whitley Strieber. Contact isn't the rare part. The psychic activation afterwards is actually pretty consistent. People feeling like they've been spiritually expanded and they have knowledge beyond what they should currently know. So I think here's the part that really matters about this, and a lot of people miss this, is you don't need CIA clearance to have these experiences. You don't need to go and do even the Monroe Institute in a far off land, you can actually do this today. As actually now the Gateway Experience is an online 8-week program that you can literally do through your own platform. You don't need any prior experience. And the exact technology that was used in a program the CIA once classified is sitting there waiting for anyone curious enough to sign up. Now, the other thing that I want to touch on that just really talks about how these ET beings sometimes get in contact with us is psychedelics. Now, especially when it comes to the UAP and disclosure movement, this is honestly a really under-discussed piece of the puzzle. In ayahuasca ceremonies, one of the most consistently reported experience across completely unrelated people, across different countries, different cultures, is encountering what's being described as the surgeons. So these are like beings who are perceived as physically operating on your body, upgrading you, removing something, repairing something. And it's reported so often, it's practically its own category of Aya experience at this point. People experiencing in these journeys is what a lot of people are experiencing, including Travis that we spoke about earlier, in these abduction cases. It is them being on some kind of surgeon table and something happening to them. Now, my perception of this is potentially that they are being upgraded. And I do still wonder, coming back to that same point, whether this is, in ayahuasca, it seems to be the second body which is being operated on. Is the same actually happening for a lot of these abduction cases? Like, a lot of abduction cases also speak about leaving their body, flying across the sky and then ending up on a craft. That's an out-of-body experience. It's just incredibly real. And so I do wonder whether these beings, these ET beings, have a way of forcing the out-of-body experience for you and separating you from your physical body so that then they can use and manipulate your second body, which seems to have an effect on your physical body. Anyway, I digress. But I've personally not done ayahuasca yet. It's something that I really want to do, but I have done mushroom journeys. And in a similar state, I have myself met a lot of these ET beings. I've had not one, not two, not three, not four, but multiple experiences where I've met, first of all, Nord beings, and then these other that refer to themselves as the Saigons. When they come down to me, they're like these triangle head shaped people, incredibly like spiritually evolved. But whenever I'm talking to them, they're speaking about the upgrades that they want to give me and activating certain psi abilities. And even if it's just predicting something that's going to happen in the future, for example, something crazy is going to happen in the next 2 weeks for you, and you just need to be prepared to be really uncomfortable. This literally happened like 2 weeks ago, and now I'm going to the Monroe Institute, and it is requiring me to be very uncomfortable in order to go. But, the message that they've given me have been direct messages about what's coming. They've not been just vague feelings. They've been specific communication. And a lot of these psychedelic journeys are about us healing something internally. There's been studies to show that the effects of psychedelics is completely able to rewire our brain to help heal trauma, to remove certain illnesses, to heal people's physical ailments. Like, these tools, again, have been placed on this planet for us to heal ourselves, to expand ourselves, to allow ourselves to grow in some way and become more of who we have come here to be. This category of contact through psychedelics is one of the most consistent threads in altered state experiences today, which is pretty cool, I'd say. And this is across people that have never spoken to each other, who, maybe they've read the same books, but maybe people have read no books. These are coming from completely different sources, but they're saying the same thing. That's just not just a coincidence. And the last thing that I do want to talk about, another way that we can really access this have been proven, is through breathwork. And some of my strongest and most vivid experiences and meetings with ET beings that I have experienced have been through these deep psychedelic breathwork experiences and shifting my brainwave state from a high beta into a theta. And I'm assuming potentially a gamma state, which is where you have a lot of these very ethereal experiences. The Monroe Institute has this one aspect of it where you can get your brain hooked up, where they then basically scan your brain, going through whether it's a gateway process or something similar. They can then, based on how your brain navigates between beta, alpha, theta, gamma, they can predict when you're about to have an out-of-body experience, when you're about to expand into somewhere else or connect with a being or whatever it is. These things are all down to our brainwave state, and a lot of that we can really shift with breathwork. So I do think that breathwork is another one of those experiences where it becomes a doorway for these beings, this contact to occur, because we're expanding our vessel, we're expanding our perception and our consciousness, and then they are able to download whether it's codes or information or ways of being or healing that can actually happen in the body. The through line really is this: whether it's the Monroe Institute's tapes technology, ayahuasca, mushrooms, or breathwork, the mechanics are really identical. If you change the brainwave state, then the veil will actually thin and you're able to have these contact experiences with these beings. And I think the most important part about all of this is whether we're talking about physical abduction like Travis Walton, or a psychic awakening like with Whitley Strieber, or a gateway participant meeting an intelligence during an out-of-body experience, or someone drinking ayahuasca and meeting the surgeons, or meeting beings of light in a breathwork session, there is really one consistent through line across all of these accounts, is that they're not just observing us. They're not trying to do anything to us. They are upgrading us. And Walter comes back changed. Strieber comes back with enhanced abilities that he didn't have before. Ayahuasca surgeons are described literally as operating, repairing, removing, upgrading something from the body, which is exactly what people are experiencing in these abduction cases as well. Gateway participants have expanded intuition and psychic abilities. Across all of these real-life abduction cases and extended consciousness states, the same pattern holds. It's not a random encounter. It's not just observation. It looks like they're preparing us for something. It looks like they're awakening something within us that's dormant, which then raises the real question: preparation for what? Whatever the answer is, the evidence keeps pointing in the same direction and conclusion. Contact isn't the end point. It's actually the beginning of a change that is happening inside of the people who are experiencing it. We're becoming more of who we've forgotten to be. So let's bring this all the way back. Disclosure isn't just a press conference. It's not just a leaked document, although those really do matter because it's about getting the truth out. The real disclosure that's happening is personal, and it is already available through you through all of these different modalities. You can connect with ET beings today, even if you use Dr. Stephen Greer's SETI, which we haven't spoken about in this video, but is another way that you can project your consciousness up and have these incredible experiences with these higher dimensions or these craft that completely change your perception of what is real. But what is very clear is these experiences happen when your nervous system gets quiet enough, coherent enough, and silent enough and regulated enough to access the same non-local awareness that the Monroe Institute has spent decades proving is actually real and the CIA have backed up. So the question really is, after all of this, is not whether you're ready to meet an ET, but are you ready to be upgraded? Are you ready to access more of these aspects of yourselves? You don't need a UFO to have contact. You need coherence. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this, please make sure that you subscribe, you hit that like button, and leave a comment below to let me know what you took away from this. I'm so grateful for you guys for tuning in. And if you do want a way to access these subconscious states more easily and to shift your brainwave state, that is exactly what we do inside of the In-Awe membership. I will leave all of the information below here. I hope to see you inside, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye guys.